I'm Dustin with Rocky Mountain ATV MC, and today I'll be showing you how to replace the fork seals on the Honda XR650L. Keeping your front suspension in good shape is key to getting the most out of your machine. Now, Honda is recommending that we are servicing the forks on the XR650 at every 8,000 miles. So to help you keep your XR in good shape, today we'll be showing you how to replace the fork seals on a 2016 Honda XR650L. Now, to do this job, we are just going to need a few basic hand tools. You will want to have a drain pan, some contact cleaner, rubber gloves, safety glasses, and some rags, as well as some replacement fork seals. Now, for today, we're going to be using the Pro X Dust and Oil Seal Kit. However, we do have many other options when it comes to choosing fork seals, especially the OEM seals. Now, you will want to have a fork oil leveling tool, a 43mm fork seal driver, along with a 43mm fork seal bullet, some fork seal grease, a ratio right, measuring tape, and some replacement suspension fluid. For today, we're going to be using the Pro Honda Suspension Fluid SS7, which is a 5-weight of fork oil, but keep in mind that we do offer many other options for replacement suspension oil, along with different suspension oil weights. And as always, before performing any work on your machine, always be sure to reference your service manual for proper procedures, safety information, and torque specs. To begin, we need to remove the front forks from the bike. To do this, we will be removing the front tire, front brake caliper, front brake line guide, speedometer cable guide, loosen the upper clamp on the rubber gaiters. Then we can remove our Schrader valve cap, depress the Schrader valve to balance the air pressure, loosen the top bridge bolts on our triple tree. Then we can loosen the fork cap on our fork. Then loosen the lower pinch bolts on our triple tree. Then remove the fork. All right, now that we have the fork off of the bike, we're going to remove the lower clamp on the rubber gaiter here, pull this off of the fork. Next, we need to clean off the forks, make sure they're nice and clean, remove any dirt or debris. Remove the rubber cap at the base of the fork. Take your screwdriver, place it into the adjuster. We're going to rotate this clockwise until it fully bottoms out, and we need to count the number of clicks and record them. Then rotate the adjuster counterclockwise until it stops. Remove the fork cap. Pull the inner fork tube down. Next, place some rags out on your table so that you have a place to put all the parts once they're removed from the suspension. Then we're going to pull the fork spring down to expose the lock nut. Place our wrench onto the lock nut like so. And then we can remove the fork cap from the lock nut. We can remove the fork cap. Then we can remove the washer or spring seat, followed by the spring. Next, we can drain the fork of its suspension oil into our drain pan. When draining the fork, make sure to cycle the dampening rod several times to make sure that all the oil is bled from the system. Clamp the base of the forks into our vise with soft jaws. Remove the center bolt with sealing washer at the base of the fork tube. Before removing the center bolt, place a drain pan underneath it to collect any residual oil. All right, now if you're trying to remove the center bolt and it's just rotating inside of there and you can feel the dampening rod rotating with it, you can use an air impact gun to remove it from the bottom of the fork. Then we can remove our dampening rod. Then we can remove our fork from the vise, place it onto our table. Then remove the dust seal with a flathead screwdriver. We're going to place the tip of the screwdriver in between the outer tube and the dust seal. Once you have the screwdriver inside, make sure to carefully and slowly work the dust seal away from the outer fork tube. Remove the dust seal. Remove the snap ring with a pick tool. Then using a slide hammering like motion, we can separate the inner tube from the outer fork tube. Remove the oil seal. Stopper ring. Guide bushing. And lastly, we can remove the inner fork tube bushing, the guide bushing here. Then take the outer fork tube, the bottom part, tip it upside down, and we're going to take out the oil lock piece. All right, now once we have all of these parts removed from the fork, we need to go through and clean everything with contact cleaner. And once all of our parts are clean, we can then go through and give everything a good inspection. When inspecting the inner fork tube, you want to take your fingernail and you're going to run it along the length of the fork tube and check for any scratches or scrapes. Anything that can catch your fingernail will need to be dressed. You can either buff that out with some Scotch-Brite or some emery cloth. Next, we can inspect our guide bushings. Now these guide bushings right here have a Teflon coating on them. Now this one here has a Teflon coating on the outside and not on the inner diameter. So we want to inspect the Teflon that's on the outer part of the coating right here and check to see if we have any metal deposits or any parts or chunks of it missing, or again any metal that's embedding itself into the Teflon, or if it's just worn through and you can see the metal. If that's the case, you will definitely want to replace these. Again, you will inspect the other guide bushing that has Teflon on the inner diameter and not the outer diameter. Again, you want to look for any type of metal deposits that are embedding themselves into the Teflon, chunks of it missing, or if it's just wearing through and you can see the metal that's on the other side. Looks like our guide bushings are in pretty good shape. Next, we can measure the free length of our spring. Now, Honda indicates that the spring's free length should not be shorter than 570 millimeters. If it is, you will want to replace your spring. Now, ours is measuring at about 571.5 millimeters, so it's still in good shape and can be reused. However, we will be upgrading the fork springs on this suspension with a kit from Reinstalling. Now, if you'd like to know more about that, be sure to check out the how-to video that will show you how to upgrade the fork springs. Now that we've got all of our parts cleaned and inspected, we can now reassemble the forks. We're going to start with the inner fork tube, and now we can install the guide bushings. Then we can install our oil lock piece into the bottom of the inner fork tube. Now this is directional. You will want to have the side that's opened like this, facing into the inner fork tube. The side that's got the shoulder to it, this is going to be facing downwards. Then place the inner fork tube into the outer fork tube. Make sure that the oil lock piece does not come out from the inner fork tube when you're installing it into the outer fork tube. Next, we're going to take our dampening rod. Now the nut that's on the end of the shaft here, we're going to thread this on until it's seated all the way onto the shaft, just lightly seated. Then we can set this into our suspension assembly. Place the lower portion of the fork tube into our vise with soft jaws. Now if your dampening rod doesn't seat fully into the fork, you may need to adjust it slightly until it seats all the way into the base. Install the center bolt and torque to 25 foot-pounds. Remove the fork from the vise. Then we can install the stopper ring. Install the seal bolt onto the inner fork tube. Next, we can install our oil seal. Now there is a difference between the oil and the dust seals. This one here is our oil seal, and the one in my left hand is our dust seal. As you can see, there is a difference between the two. The oil seal is a little more square as far as its profile is concerned. And when it comes to the dust seal, we've got a very distinctive lip with a silver ring that protrudes from its body. So next we're going to be installing the oil seal. Now before we do this, we're going to coat the inner and outer diameter with some seal grease. Now when it comes to installing the oil seal, it is directional, and as you can see here, this top side where we've got some indentations, this is going to be our top side. It's got a slight lip that will protrude from the body. And then on the bottom side, that's going to be facing down towards the oil, is going to have this little recessed channel inside of it. Inside of there will also be a silver spring ring. Again, this side is going to be facing down, and this side is going to be facing up. Then we can place it onto our fork. We're going to take our fork seal driver and we're going to drive the seal. We're going to seat it into the outer fork tube. So we will drive the seal with the seal driver using a slide hammer-like motion. If you notice that change in pitch, the change in the sound, it lets us know that the seal has fully driven as far as it can go. Next, we can install our snap ring. Once the snap ring has been installed, give it a good inspection to make sure that it's fully seated in its ring landing. Then we can install our seal bullet again, lubricate our dust seal, lubricate the inner and outer diameter. Then we can place it onto our fork tube. And again, this dust seal is directional. This part right here that protrudes, that has the silver spring ring, this is going to be facing upwards. And this side right here is going to be facing down. Then we can seat the dust seal just with our fingertips. All right, so now we can add our fork oil. Now the fork's going to take a total of 19.1 fluid ounces, but to begin, we're going to start by adding half of that, which is 9.55 ounces. All right, now once we've added the oil, we can then reach in, grab the dampening rod, and we're going to cycle it several times so that we can bleed the cartridge free of air. Next, we can finish pouring out an additional 9.55 fluid ounces, and we're going to add that to the fork. Now, when you're adding the last remaining amount of oil, you're going to want to pour this into the center of the dampening rod. And once we've added the last remaining oil, we will cycle the shaft several times again just to ensure that all the air bubbles have been worked out of the cartridge. Now, as you begin to pull the shaft up, you're going to notice that oil is going to begin to flow out of the top of the dampening rod. This is a good thing. This lets us know that the fluid's making it all the way through the cartridge, and we will also be able to observe to see if there are any air bubbles that are coming from the top of the dampening rod shaft. And it looks like we're in good shape. Now we're going to push our dampening rod all the way into the fork tube, and then we're going to take our fork oil height measurement. Now to take this measurement, we will have the inner fork tube completely compressed into the fork assembly, and again, the inner fork dampening rod be pushed down all the way as well. Now on the fork oil level tool, we're going to measure out 145 millimeters. Now on the fork oil leveling tool, it's going to have 5 millimeter increments, so you can look on here and it should have a set of numbers on it. So we're going to make the bottom side of our tool here, we're going to set this to 145 millimeters. Now we're going to place this into our fork assembly, just like so. We'll hold it inside of there, and then we will pull back on the plunger on our syringe and remove any excess oil if there is any present. Now we can install the fork spring. Now there is a slight difference between each end of this fork spring. As you can see down here on the bottom side of it, we've got a couple of coils that are a little closer together, the tighter wound coils, as opposed to the coils on the top side of the fork spring. So the side with the tighter wound coils will be inserted into the fork tube first. Now before we install the fork spring, we're going to reach in and pull the dampening rod up until it's at its highest position. Then we can install the fork spring. Make sure to grab the dampening rod and hold on to it. Then we can install the spring seat or washer. We're going to pull this fork spring down just a little bit so we can get a better grip on the dampening rod. Then we can install our fork cap. Once it seats onto the dampening rod, we're going to hold the fork cap in a fixed position with our tool, and then we're going to rotate and thread the lock nut up onto the fork cap, and we're going to torque this to 15 foot-pounds. Then we're going to take just a small amount of fork oil. We're going to lubricate the fork cap's O-ring. We can slide the outer tube up to greet the fork cap. Thread the fork cap into the inner tube, and we're going to torque this to 17 foot-pounds. Take your pick tool, we're going to depress the Schrader valve, and this will balance the air pressure inside of the fork to atmospheric pressure. We can then reinstall the Schrader valve cap. Then at the base of the fork, we're going to set our compression setting back to the measurement that we had recorded earlier. So we're going to take our flathead screwdriver, insert it into the adjuster. We're going to rotate this clockwise until it fully seats. Once it is fully seated, we will rotate the adjuster counterclockwise and count the number of clicks and set it to its original position. Then we can install the rubber end cap. Make sure that it's fully seated. And then we can install the rubber gator. When installing the gators, the bottom side of it onto the fork tube, be careful with it, take your time. It may be a little bit difficult, but again, take your time to make sure that you don't rip or damage the gator boot. Make sure that the gator is seated correctly. And before we secure the clamp that will secure the gator to the fork tube, we want to make sure that the backside here with the fastener is facing towards the rear of the forks. Secure the clamp. All right, now we can take this over to the bike and insert it into the triple tree. Make sure that the fork tubes are sitting at the same height, and then we can tighten the upper and lower pinch bolts to 24 foot-pounds. Now, once you've done that, you're gonna slide this gator up to greet the bottom bridge on the triple trees and then tighten the clamp down. And then we can repeat the exact same process for rebuilding the other fork. And that's it. That's really all there is to it when it comes to replacing the fork seals and freshening up the oil. Now, if you like this video and you want to see more, make sure to hit the like button, then subscribe to our YouTube channel for more product spotlights, how-tos, and top 5s. I'm Dustin with Rocky Mountain. Thanks for watching, and keep the wrenches turning.